think that the true goal, and it was very clear from his discussion on the 22nd of June, when they attacked the 3 nuclear sites, was that he had been persuaded by people in Washington and also the people in Tel Aviv that Iran was just a house of cards. It could collapse at any time. It was just very, very vulnerable. And that there was underneath it a seething mass of Iranians longing to see, if you like, what they call the mullahocracy removed, and that then there would be an upsurge and there'd be a revolution, and it would end up like Syria. It would end up like Syria, very much affected. And that was what happened on the 13th, the attempt to do this. And it failed. It failed completely. Technically, it was a very clever operation. It took months to put it into place with pre-positioning weapons and equipment into Iran through the Kurdish Erbil entrance, and also across by Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan played an important part in providing access for not only for missiles, but also airspace by which the Israelis could use their standoff weapons. What was it all about? It was about that, because it was about actually destroying the state of Iran. That's what he hoped for. And on that day, on the 22nd, as I mentioned and wrote about it, Michael Wolff was saying, he kept saying, it's wonderful. I mean, they're going to win, aren't they? This is going to be the game changer. This is going to be a fantastic move. And, the Israelis are so clever at this. So he was expecting that. And of course, strategically, it was a bust, because actually what has happened, and I want to touch on that, is that Iran has not only emerged more unified and more consolidated as a society, it has emerged with a strong sense of Shia identity and Iranian identity that is embracing everyone. You only had to see what happened in the streets, but there's another aspect, and something why this whole process is not really working, is because the other day it was Muharram. That is the celebration of what happened at the Battle of Karbala, when the Prophet's grandson was killed by the forces from Damascus. And it is a very symbolic state. And it has fired up Shiism everywhere. And so what inadvertently Washington is doing, it's starting a new war in the Middle East, sectarian war. ISIS is back on the scene in Syria. What's happening in Syria is terrible. Really, there are mostly the Shia Alawites, the Shia, are being slaughtered, thousands. And many of their women, their wives, their daughters being taken as wives of ISIS, of Al-Qaeda members in Syria. Sex slaves, in other words, just as we saw ISIS doing before in Iraq. But the slaughter is going on of Christians and of Shia and of sectarianism. And so this is building also a huge feeling amongst the Shia everywhere in the Middle East. Don't forget, if you look just at the Middle East, you leave aside Indonesia and Malaysia, which are big Sunni states, probably the Shia are just about 50-50 or a slight majority in the Middle East. They're not just a minority. They are a major fragment, major sector of power. And these are becoming very, if you like, agitated and very determined to change what's happening. So you had just a few weeks ago, 4 of the most influential Shia clerics, not in Iran, but around, if you like, the whole Shia world, including led by Grand Ayatollah Sistani in Iraq, wrote statements saying that if this attack went on, and particularly on the supreme leader, they would call for an ijtihad fatwa. They'd issue, in other words, a mandatory call on all Shia to join in the war against Israel and the United States. This is the consequence of what's happening. And now what we see, the big fated movement that was supposed to happen in Washington, and that there would be a deal and all would be all right in Gaza, and that would set the scene for Abraham Accords 2.0. I mean, not only did that not happen, but what we're seeing now is that Trump's envoy in Lebanon, Mr. Barak, has warned the Lebanese they have a choice. Either they have to disarm Hezbollah completely. Hezbollah, the Shia of Hezbollah, are really a majority, and they win the elections in Lebanon, the local elections in Lebanon. He's saying to Lebanon, you have Syria on one side, you have Israel on the other side. You either do that or else you will lose Lebanon. There will be a war, and Syria, coupled with Israel, will invade and will break up Lebanon and create a new Al-Sham, Greater Syria, so that the northern part of Lebanon, which is Sunni fundamentalists, will go to Syria, and Lebanon will disappear off the map, and it will just be a bigger pro-Israel Syria. And it's the Israelification of this part of the Middle East they are attempting.
Right.
But it's more likely to start a civil war in Lebanon. The Shia have already said, Hezbollah has said, categorically, we will not disarm, whatever America says. But that is the ultimatum that has been given. So we're seeing the whole of the Middle East, if you like, affected by, it's a return to 10 years ago, with ISIS now playing a role in if you like, in Syria and in Lebanon and in Pakistan and in Iraq, of course. All of this is heating up and is become highly volatile because of the bombing of Iran, first of all, and the attempt to kill the supreme leader, one of what they call the Mahjar, the leaders of Shia Islam around the world. So it's created a big, strong pushback. And of course, Qatar and Israel are pushing this, using this ISIS forces in Syria. Just as 10 years ago, I've been through this movie so many times now, when the West fires up the extremist Sunni, if you like, radicals to go out and kill people who are different, who are Shia or Alawite or some other sect, which they don't like. And of course, I mean, this is a setting not for creating, if you like, this isn't going to bring about the Abraham 2.0 solution. It's going to create mayhem in the area. And also, even although I mentioned we use the term Salafist for these radical ISIS type of forces, but ordinary Sunnis are actually being radicalized too in favor of Iran and the Sunnis. Not as in mass, but some important Sunni groups are now showing their allegiance to Iran. So we're working it up, and of course, Iran is preparing for the next part of this war. So you have two wars now going on in the Middle East: the war on Iran, and then you have the war on Syria, Lebanon, and on Iraq as well. And then, of course, you have the other three wars in Russia and China taking place. And all of those are going badly. So not only the Gaza did fail, the Gaza sort of summit in Washington didn't produce a solution, but Iran did not produce any outcome. It produced the opposite. Iran is now the leading state in the Middle East. It's a very strong state. It's a big state, 90 million people, and with weapons and resources to match.
Let me ask you about what you think the White House's thinking was. I mean, did Mossad so radically misjudge the likely outcome in Iran? Did the CIA and MI6 so radically misjudge the likely outcome to the Trump bombing in Iran? Or did Netanyahu and Trump just disregard professional intelligence data and do what they wanted to do?
No, they completely misread the ground. Completely misread the ground. They really believed that, you know, after what had happened to Hezbollah and the assassinations of the Hezbollah leadership, including Hassan Nasrallah, they really believed that if they did a decapitation strike in Iran, killing their leading scientists and their leading military commanders, and perhaps they tried to kill the supreme leader and the clerics at the same time. They thought then it would collapse because they persuaded themselves that Iran is this house of cards. And you know, it is believed, just as you hear the same story endlessly played. This is why I call it the blunders of hubris. You see the same story about Russia. I don't need to remind you, you've heard it often enough on this channel. You know, Russia is weak. Its economy is collapsing. Any moment now, Putin will be pushed out and there'll be a revolution and it will all change back and they'll have someone placid and westernized to deal with, and they can carve up Russia and get its resources, just as they hope to do in Iran. And it is the same story. How many times have you heard China is weak and it's easily, and the tariffs will force it onto its knees? All of these things have been completely and utterly misjudged because of the sort of psyche in Israel and its persuasion. And clearly they had persuaded, you know, Trump that this was what was going to happen, just as they persuaded the neocons and the others who have persuaded Trump, it seems, now to escalate against Russia, which is going to be a huge mistake. And all of this is really compounded by the fact that, you know, the financial side of it is proving to be a mistake too. Look around the world. All of the states, apart from Europe, are trying to combine together to challenge the sort of shock and awe of tariffs, and are not accepting it. And China certainly isn't, but other states, even coming and talking to the Europeans and saying, look, we can't have this. We're not going to do this. So, I mean, we will see a big, I think, exit. If it's anything like Lindsey Graham suggests, what is going to be said tonight by Trump, that they're going to start seizing the frozen Russian assets, that they are going to take them, and that then Europe is going to use those or other means to pay for America to send more long-distance missiles to attack Russia, and that they are then going to sanction Russia. If it's all of these things, I mean, well, it's the beginning of the end of the Trump project. It is the decomposition, I believe, of the whole project. It's that serious. That's serious.
He is prepared either to address the nation or to make some kind of a comment later today, Monday, July 14, on Iran. Do you expect he's going to go back to the Biden mode? We're going to give them whatever they need. We're going to take arms that we need and send them to Iran, or sell them to Great Britain, which will sell them to, I said Iran, I meant Ukraine, and sell them to Ukraine. What is he going to say tonight about Ukraine that will undermine his credibility and maybe
Ukraine or Iran?
Ukraine.
Ukraine. Well, that's what Lindsey Graham has been on television and sort of prefacing it and saying you're going to see a huge change. There's going to be, as I say, there's going to be action by the Europeans and the Americans to take some of the frozen assets and to use them to fund weapons supplies to Ukraine. There's going to be a big increase in weapons. Long-range weapons that, I don't know, we're only relying on Lindsey Graham's account of it. It's not, I don't want people to understand that these have actually been announced yet. It will be tonight that Trump will announce it. But he's suggested that there will be missiles that can strike Moscow or St. Petersburg long distance into Russia, and that they'll put the mother of all sanctions onto Russia, 500% sanctions on anyone purchasing Russian oil or gas. I mean, the latter is really just, I think, a joke. I mean, if they were really imposed, I mean, it would be end of the trading system. The end of the energy trading system. It would be a really, it's just, not really very, I mean, the whole package, I think, is likely to send the dollar diving because people will be saying it's not going to be dangerous.
Here's what Senator Graham said yesterday on this. Chris, cut number 2.
I expect in the coming days you will see weapons flowing at a record level to help Ukraine defend themselves. I expect in the coming days that there will be tariffs and sanctions available to President Trump he's never had before. I expect in the coming days more support from Europe regarding their efforts to help Ukraine. Putin made a miscalculation here. For 6 months, President Trump tried to entice Putin to the table. The attacks have gone up, not down. One of the biggest miscalculations Putin has made is to play Trump. And you just watch, in the coming days and weeks, there's going to be a massive effort to get Putin to the table. And to those who are helping him, China buying cheap Russian oil and having no accountability, those days are about over.
And World War III is what they're looking for. Is the United States going to put missiles in Ukraine aimed at Moscow and St. Petersburg, as you alluded to earlier? We're back to where we were when this thing started, when NATO wanted to harm Ukraine.
That's not what I was saying. It was what Blumenthal and and Graham were saying. But I'd just like to say, at the end of this Sergei Ryabkov, who is the deputy foreign minister of Russia, and gave an interview to TASS in the last day or two. And he said on this, that all the aspects of the basis, the very starting blocks for normalization, haven't even begun. So what I'm talking about is, you remember that the United States seized the diplomatic premises of Russia, consulates and other buildings that belonged under the Vienna Treaty to Russia. None of them, there's been no progress on returning. There's been no progress on, if you like, establishing flights between Russia and the United States. There's no progress even in nominating a US ambassador to Moscow. And he said on all of these, this is the first steps to our relationship with the United States, and nothing has happened. And I mean, so, what's going on? I think it's just the same thing as before, that it is thought by the Trump and his team that they can just, trick, entice Putin into what I call an attritional cage by putting more weapons into Ukraine and trying to sort of wear him down till he's forced to accept a ceasefire which is against Russian interests, so that the war can be kept going, so that the war can continue for 10 years, 20 years, whatever it takes to weaken Russia and finally, they hope, break it up. But all of this is, this is just hype. I don't think I don't think it will happen. But what is the other, that's the only explanation. Why has not a single move been taken? Ryabkov is a very serious diplomat. I know him. And, he speaks actually in low key. He isn't dramatic. And he says, nothing is happening. So what if you're Putin and you're Russian, you assume, this is deliberate. I mean, they are not prepared to do anything to really make a relationship work. So what they are doing is simply trying to sort of coax Russia into giving up on its own interests so that America can count this as a great success. But I would like to return to Iran, because you mentioned Iran a little earlier. And I wanted to say that that is also moving to a very serious point, because I think what is today, on the 15th, I think it's Tuesday, tomorrow, the Euro 3 are about to start the process for snapback of sanctions on Iran. They've said that. They formally said they're going to launch the process of snapback of sanctions. At the same time, the Europeans are telling Russia, and they're telling everyone, they want the IAEA to go back into Iran. Now, it's the IAEA, I don't know what to say. They're about as popular as a herd of skunks at the moment in Iran. I mean, they need massive protection. They are so unpopular. They're regarded as the authors of, the killings of their scientists and other things. But the combined thing is going to push Iran towards leaving the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. It's inevitable, because they are not going to have the IAEA coming back in that sort of free mode they had before. They can have certain, subject to the Security Council complete monitoring. But if there is an attempt to do snapback elections, which will then be mandatory for all UN member states to impose on Iran, I think you will see that. And what does that mean? It's going to trigger another round of war, because Israel will say, look, they've cheated. They probably kept the uranium, enriched uranium. They probably still got it. And, we are committed to making sure that it doesn't reach a bomb. Actually, what the Israelis believe, and genuinely believe, is that there's no way that they can guarantee that Iran will not get a bomb as things stand, even with inspections and technical means. The only way is to have regime change and to put in a Western government, a Pavlov or someone like that, as a Western puppet. That's the only way they see it. So, round two is coming. So we have that, and we have the escalation in Russia. We have the wider escalation going on, not only in Syria, but also in Azerbaijan, which the West, NATO, and Britain particularly are heating up and using, not only against Iran, but they're using this Caucasus state against Russia. The Russians are throwing out many Azerbaijanis because it's largely criminal groups in there who the Russians believe were possibly responsible for that spider's web attack on the strategic bombers, that they facilitated the positioning of equipment. These are really, there's been a long history of Azerbaijanis having criminal groups there.
You're painting a picture as if we're on the precipice of World War III.
I'm painting a picture that because of these three egregious mistakes, actually everything is heating up across the globe. It's heating up even in, in the environment of China too, where, states are being very much pressed to join in a trade boycott of China. And China is not going to accept that. So everything is heating up everywhere at the same time. And that's why I say you know, this, what's proposed, we'll hear tonight for Russia, what's going to happen after Tuesday if the Euro 3 then trigger snapback sanctions. What's going to happen if really Israel, with US backing, starts a war in Syria and Lebanon? I mean, another war there. What's going to happen with China, with more tariffs? All of these things are coming together in a sense to make a perfect storm, yes. But it's actually also the point at which you can say what the world is watching is the decomposition of Trump, of him. He is becoming, you know, not only hubristic, but it is extending beyond the capacities of the United States resources. He's overextended the United States to such an extent that this is going to be a real crisis. And all these other things are adding to it, the sense of no credibility, the sense that these tariffs, I mean, are not believable by some in the West, but in other parts of the world, you know, they are a threat to their well-being. So there's a big, big change taking place. I think we are at the crossroads where there is the clear signs of, if you like, the decomposition of the United States Western project at the moment. And this is accelerating and producing a strengthening of Russia, Iran, and China, and the global South, and even the other states in Southeast Asia. Why was it Japan and South Korea didn't come to the recent NATO meeting? Because they disapproved of Iran. I mean, you know, these are two closest, some of the closest allies of the United States are voting with their feet and with their pocket and saying, no, we disagree what happened with a sort of complete out of the blue attack on Iran. And what's happened in Iran is heating up the whole of the Middle East because it is becoming a war again between the Al-Qaeda supported extremists, the fundamentalists who kill others who are not, if you like, Sunni militants, and who are now we see an increasing Shia riposte across the board, across the Middle East. And I don't know what the consequences of this will be, but I can just say it's not good news for, you know, Abraham Accords 2.0 at all.
Alastair, thank